Nothing in this podcast is intended as investment advice, and the people in this podcast may hold positions in the stocks they talk about. Do not buy any investment based solely on the companies we mention. Please do your own research.
Welcome to Monday Upbeat Markets with me, Graeme Dickson.
And me, Kevin Hornsby.
Okay, today we're going to be talking to our guest company, which is Solvonis Therapeutics, SVNS, followed by Zenith Energy, Tungsten West, Energy Pathways, Cornish Metals, African Pioneer, Critical Metals, Kindred Resources, if I didn't say that already, Lander Resources, and then a critical look at silver and gold. Hello and a warm welcome to Solvonis Therapeutics with Anthony Tennyson and Professor Nutt. Welcome.
Hello, Graeme.
Hello.
So pleased you're here, and thank you for making time to be on our show. We'll start with you, Professor Nutt. I see that you are a lecturer at Imperial College. How do you manage to spend time devoting time towards Solvonis?
Yeah, I've been a professor of neuropsychopharmacology at Imperial College for over 15 years. And a few years ago, I decided to give up my clinical practice in the NHS and move to work with Solvonis. And the reason for that is that I really couldn't get traction from big pharma or even research councils to do the kind of work that I wanted to do, particularly in the field of addiction. And Solvonis offered me that opportunity to really move my science from the bench to the bedside and then beyond.
Fantastic. And how much time a week do you spend with Solvonis? Is it So
I'm half time with Solvonis and half time with Imperial.
Very good. Okay, switching over to you, Anthony, the Chief Executive of Solvonis Therapeutics. What this valuation disparity between Solvonis, which I think is valued at around about 17.5 million, is that right? And your peers in America just seems to be huge. Is there any explanation?
Well, there's a couple of reasons for that. One is the availability of capital in New York is just significantly greater than the availability of capital in London. So the greater the demand for companies in which to invest, larger amounts of capital drives up the valuation. The second reason, I believe, is London follows along behind New York, maybe 6 to 12 months. The markets in New York have been risk off for the last 4 years as interest rates have gone up. Riskier investments, particularly biotech and healthcare, have moved out of fashion. That has changed with interest rates coming down in New York. Or in the US, I should say, and with the US markets now beginning to move risk on. And I think that's been evidenced by, I think there was $7 billion invested into follow-on fundings in biotech in New York in January, and $7 billion in December, and $9 billion in January, which is the largest follow-on investment month or January in the history of the biotech. So we believe the markets in New York are moving risk back, risk on. For healthcare and biotech, we think that should follow along into London in due course. But I think also there's a different attitude to biotech and an understanding of the biotech model in New York, probably because the US healthcare market is significantly larger, and therefore the upside for people selling medicines into that market is obviously greater, and so the valuations are higher. And we certainly do have a medium to long-term aspiration to be a healthcare or biotech company listed on NASDAQ, but we're currently listed on the LSE and very happy with our progress to date on the LSE.
Very good. Professor David Nutt, tell us a little bit about your history. I know you've had history in the UK with governments and lots of other things you've been involved in. So just give us a bit of a resume of your life in this area.
Well, I'm a psychiatrist, I'm a psychopharmacologist. That means I use drugs to study the effects of or how the brain works, because the brain is a chemical organ. One of my claims to fame, I think, is that I've probably given more different kinds of drugs to human beings than anyone else, which means I've got good insights into what drugs do. But my particular challenge over the years has been addiction. And that's an orphan indication, effectively. Very little innovation, very little investment. And I joined up with Anthony and Solvonis because he had a clear target to treat addiction with innovative treatments like ketamine and new entactogens.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things, isn't it? The government the government makes copious amounts of taxation pounds from alcohol, especially, which we all have agreed now is not really good for us, but yet is socially acceptable. But this causes a massive problem in the world, if you like, because it does affect our brains, whether we like it or not. So how do you see that moving forward? We see a generation, I think, that the younger generation now, which is moving away from alcohol, but obviously there's still many generations in there that think alcohol is the way forward. So what's your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts are that despite the taxation, or despite the tax revenue that comes into the UK government, there's still a net deficit of about 10 billion from the alcohol industry. So we are subsidising the alcohol industry, and the same is true in the States. The second thing is, yes, some young people are reducing their consumption, but overall consumption isn't changing that much. And what that tells us is that there's another group of young people who are drinking more. In fact, alcohol is the leading cause of death in men and women under the age of 50 in the UK. And that is a statistic that has been growing in terms of percentage over the last decade. So there are still a lot of people who are severely damaged by alcohol. And many of them are damaged because they didn't want to drink excessively, but alcohol, of course, produces addiction. And when you're addicted, it's very hard to break that habit. So that's where we're targeting our intervention.
So your life, if you like, your academic life has been that you've been watching all of this. So Solvonis is allowing you to maybe take some actions in this situation. Is that fair to say?
That is absolutely right. It's almost impossible to raise money to do addiction studies from research councils or the Wellcome Trust. In fact, the Wellcome Trust in Britain don't even have addiction as a target, even though addiction has at least as large a burden in terms of healthcare as disorders like cancer. So yes, I've been banging a drum for us to get more, to accept that addiction is not something that people choose. It's not a lifestyle choice that many politicians think. Is actually, unfortunately, the case. It's some people will use legal drugs like alcohol and tobacco, and all illegal drugs as well, and get addicted. And those people cost the country a lot, and they deserve treatments. And Solvonis offers that opportunity to innovate in the space with ketamine and then with our new entactogens.
So the drug that is furthest down the line, I think, is SVNS 001. Do you want to just tell us how that came about and where we are in terms of the position of the drug?
So Kevin and Graeme, we were lucky in the early stages of a precursor company that Solvonis acquired, a company called Awaken Life Sciences. Through an introduction through David, we were introduced to Professor Celia Morgan, who's head of department in the University of Exeter. She had initiated and completed a phase 2 trial in assessing the innovation and the use of ketamine in combination with cognitive behavioral therapy specifically designed to prevent relapse for people suffering with severe alcohol use disorder. And she completed that trial and completed that trial was successful. And I think a bit of a change in attitude from some of what David was talking about to maybe today, based upon the significant problem that alcohol causes for British society, but also society at large, was that phase 2 trial was 100% funded by the UK Department of Health through the Medical Research Council. And the results of that trial, Kevin, were groundbreaking. Pre-detox, so detoxification and randomization, where people are assigned into the different arms of the trial, participants in that trial were abstinent 2% of the time. So that means they were abstinent or sober 7 days a year. So if you think to everything that David was talking about,
I think they were asleep those 7 days, to be honest with you.
But if you think to the deficit and how much the UK healthcare system is subsidising the alcohol industry, just think of the impact that being sober only 7 days a year has on your body, on your family, on your community, the total cost of treatment through the rest of your life, emergency rooms, potentially wherever you end up when you're drunk. Just the cost, the burden to the state is significant for those individuals. Those that went through the active arm of that trial achieved, on average, 86% abstinence in the 6 months post-treatment. So a very short, efficient, outpatient treatment cycle of 3 doses of racemic ketamine supported by manualized cognitive behavioral therapy specifically designed to prevent relapse moved people from on average 2% to 86% abstinence. It's really unheard of in the treatment of this chronic disease.
Yeah, no, it's remarkable, the
Yeah.
results. I mean, even if you took off 25% of that and it became, 60% of people benefited from it, it'd be amazing. It'd be tremendous. And everybody would be queuing up to do it, obviously.
Exactly. And so just to evidence everyone queuing up, the ongoing interest from the state in the UK, we're now in phase 3. We've brought that program together into phase 3, so that potentially the final stage before applying for approval to commercialize the drug, we brought that forward into phase 3 in combination with the University of Exeter and the UK Department of Health. So we've got support, for gold star support from the academic institution, but also very importantly from the state in the UK through the NIHR and the MRC. They're funding most of the cost of that trial, and then it's been run in the NHS. And I think, as David reminded me recently, most of the key opinion leaders in the UK alcohol addiction industry or treatment industry are involved in the trial in one shape or another. So that is a great validation, both for the importance of what we're doing, the potential future value to the state of what we're doing, but actually potentially changing an attitude in this at the state level within the UK because of the impact that alcohol addiction has in the healthcare system. So we're really pleased with the progress. And our business model, Kevin, is, because we're small, we're really lean, but our focus is to progress research to a specific point and then to seek commercial partners to bring it forward. And then we'd move from it, rather than commercializing the drug ourselves, seeking to earn milestone payments and future royalties. And so sticking to that, I think your audience may or may not be aware, but we've retained a company called Pharma Ventures, leading UK, EMEA, Asia, in out-licensing advisory company for biotechs of our size. And they're working through a process for us now to find a commercial partner to hopefully bring that product forward at their scale, because that's the way the pharma industry works. Companies like us with a higher risk appetite and a leaner operating model run the research to a certain point. We de-risk it for the bigger companies, and then they take it in, and in essence, they just plug it into their regulatory system, their commercial system, where they can bring things forward at scale. But they let us de-risk, and then we get rewarded through royalties and milestone payments. So that
I know, Anthony, that you're dying to tell us that there's going to be a deal, but I hope there is going to be.
We are just one little thing just to note on the potential future impact that this might have on the addiction treatment industry. The US, much bigger market. The leading brand in the US for treating alcohol addiction is Vivitrol. Vivitrol is owned by a company called Alkermes. They, in their registration trial, so their penultimate trial before seeking approval from the FDA to launch the drug, we achieved in our phase 2, we achieved a 50% reduction in heavy drinking days against their active arm in their registration trial. So we think we're at the inflection point of something quite interesting, given how we move people from 2% to 86% abstinence, but we actually outperformed the leading US brand in our phase 2 versus their registration trial. So we're excited about the future.
And I suppose the thing that comes to my mind, David, is that with all of these things, we need to affect the brain, not just with drugs. Okay, so in other words, I mean, my view of it, I actually trained with human givens, if you've heard of human givens, is that, we need to basically get that security guard down so that we can use our thinking brain, and I presume that's what the ketamine does. It allows people to think logically about their decisions, and therefore, when they're thinking logically, they're less likely to try and destroy themselves with alcohol. Is that fair to say or not?
Yes. Yeah, so there are two aspects to ketamine therapy. The first is ketamine disrupts the habitual thoughts that I can't live without alcohol. So people can think differently. But also you have a process called neuroplasticity for weeks after the treatment. And just to emphasize, we are talking just about 3 treatments a week apart. But for weeks after each treatment, your brain is in a better state to learn new ways of thinking, and that's why the therapy which goes with it helps you get back onto the right track and stay on the right track. Get your thoughts back to where they were before you became very dependent on alcohol.
Very good. So the next question I ask you, obviously we're going for addictions in all shapes and sizes, if you like. And you seem to now be producing a production line of new opportunities and new drugs as they come out of Solvonis. So tell us what's available, and more importantly, tell us what you are most excited about in terms of these opportunities.
So Kevin, we've got a dual R&D approach, a dual approach to our research and development of drugs to treat certain indications. So first thing is, what we're doing is we're seeking to develop small molecules. So those molecules get into the brain to target high burden diseases across addiction and psychiatry, which are two of the biggest untreated needs within the healthcare system globally. We have got 2 programs in the clinic, as we would say, which is in human. So we've got that first program, SVN001, where we're targeting severe alcohol use disorder for the UK and EU market, and that is in phase 3, which is the final stage, prior to seeking approval to market your drug. We have a second drug which we're targeting at the much larger and potentially more valuable US addiction treatment market, alcohol addiction treatment market, called SVN002, where we're working to repurpose J&J's Spravato, which they have on label, so approved as a nasal spray for the treatment of depression. And they've turned that into, the current run rate for that drug is to be about $2 billion for 2026, so $2 billion annual revenue forecast for 2026. We're repurposing that, which means we're modifying their already approved drug. The reason that we're doing that is it is quicker, lower risk, and therefore significantly cheaper to repurpose an already approved drug, because subject to approval from the regulators, you can do something called cross-reference into their data package. So the data package they produced and handed to the regulator as part of their request to be allowed to market the drug in the US, we will be able to cross-reference into that. So they conducted a full preclinical program costing a couple of $100 million. They conducted 18 phase 1 programs and then phase 2 and phase 3. So we've spoken to the regulator in the US, the FDA. They agree that we can cross-reference into their program. It's called 505(b)(2). And we are currently working to establish the scientific bridge to enable us to move from nasal to oral delivery. And so we're very excited about that. And then we've got a preclinical program where we're not in humans yet, and we're developing a range of drugs that modify the serotonin, dopamine, and noradrenaline receptors. And David, I'll ask you to just talk about that program and the various different assets that we have and the indications we're pointing at. Before then, Kevin, I'll provide you which one we're most excited about.
Yeah, so we have 2 research programs in the field of monoamines. One of them is the one I've already mentioned, the Intactogen program. And that builds on work that I did at Imperial that actually brought Anthony to me, which was to use a drug called MDMA, which is the prototypical Intactogen. And we showed that that was useful in trauma disorders, as many other people have. But MDMA has problems, not least of which it used to be, well, it's still used recreationally, it's called ecstasy. So we want to improve on MDMA, and we've developed a series of molecules which we believe have improved on MDMA. They have shorter half-lives, so the treatment can be half a day rather than a whole day, and potentially better tolerability profiles. So those are in animal studies at present, and we'll get the feed out from those studies in the next month or so. And then we will take the best one of those into a development program for trauma disorders, particularly PTSD, but also potentially disorders like depression, which may be precipitated by trauma. And then the second program is a program which has kind of fills in the missing link in current antidepressants. So you probably know that most current treatments for depression rely on drugs called SSRIs, serotonin reuptake inhibitors. And they're effective in about 50% of people, but they don't deal with all the symptoms of depression, particularly the motivation and the lack of energy and the lack of concentration. And over the years, there's been an ambition to develop a medicine that both does serotonin and also dopamine, which is the motivation transmitter. And our molecule has a very nice balance between serotonin and dopamine. So it's a kind of first in class of what we would call a serotonin dopamine reuptake.
That's interesting because
and that has utility.
The depression drugs basically just damp down the feelings. Ultimately, that's effectively what they do. The dampen us.
Correct.
And then obviously have some side effects, which is why they only work for 50% of the people. But it doesn't actually deal with the underlying problem, which is normally motivation or, other things that are different in our lives ultimately, which is where obviously maybe even therapy would work as well as the drug. But yes, sorry.
So that's right. And so actually it's somewhat even worse than that, Kevin, because if you push serotonin, just serotonin, which the SSRIs do, the serotonin elevation dampens down dopamine function, and that is probably why some people do have symptoms of loss of energy. So they're not depressed anymore, but they've also lost a bit of energy they had. So we believe that by increasing dopamine to a moderate extent, not as much as serotonin, we can get the optimal balance between those two systems, and that's something that the pharma industry has been trying to do for about 30 years, and we're very pleased that we've managed to achieve that.
Do you think that would overcome the initial problem also when people go on to these SSRIs, that actually their suicidal rate is much higher for that first month?
That's an interesting question. I don't know whether I can answer that. I mean, obviously we have to find out, but it's quite likely it will change the balance of their thinking in a more positive direction, because, as they say, what serotonin does is essentially dampen down stress responses. We want to push people more in the direction of positivity rather than just dampening down. So it's plausible, but I don't want to
understand.
We're also that molecule is a pretty important one for us, because not only does it have potential in depression, but we're also working with NIDA for addiction as well.
Yeah, shall I just explain a bit more about that? So what we already have now is we have put the Solvonis 15 against fluoxetine and SSRI and shown comparable efficacy in a rodent model, which is great. And it's a chronic model, so it works over a period of time and it keeps working. That's the first thing. But the second thing is there's been a lot of interest in terms of dealing with stimulant abuse, stimulants like cocaine and methamphetamine. There are no licensed treatments for those. And we know that these drugs work through the dopamine system. They have to get into the dopamine system to become addictive. And our uptake blocker should stop that, should reduce the uptake of cocaine and methamphetamine, so reduce its effects. But it will by itself mimic the effects. So this is a very interesting concept. NIDA have been searching for this kind of molecule for a very long time. They often use the term methadone for cocaine. Methadone and buprenorphine are very well-established substitution treatments for opiate addiction. They're enormously effective. So it's conceivable that if we prepare our new molecule in a way which occupies enough of the dopamine receptors to prevent cocaine and amphetamine having their massive addictive effect, but also protects against the molecule itself being reinforcing, then we would actually have a rather novel approach to stimulant addiction, and we're looking to turn that into a depot, so that in the same way as naltrexone depot is very powerful in opiate addiction, we can use that in cocaine and amphetamine addiction.
So can we see SVNS 15 becoming 15A, B, C, D, E, F, G in terms of all the different uses that you could have?
And so what Dave means is that there is, just like in racemic ketamine, there's an S and an OR enantiomer in our compound. Enantiomer in our compound, we think there'll be two enantiomers, and much like we're pointing racemic ketamine at severe AUD for the UK market and S-ketamine moderate to severe alcohol use disorder for the US market, there could be potential for us to do the same approach for SVN 015. So your question, Kevin, was which are we most excited about? You're kind of asked which child do I like the most, which is kind of unfair. We like
well, okay, I'll ask it differently then, okay? Anthony, which child do you like the most and is going to make the most money? And David, which child do you like that is going to change the world for more people? There you go.
Okay. So which asset do I like the most because of the greatest potential impact on the balance sheet and the market cap of the company? That's SVN 002. And the reason for that is that we are targeting that at the US market. It has a better IP profile than 001. And the US market is significant orders of magnitude larger than the US, the UK, and the EU market. So, for example, and not to bore people with stats, right, but this is really important so people understand the size of the opportunity in the US. There are 15,000 clinics registered with the federal authority in the US for the treatment of addiction, and most of those are treating alcohol use disorder. The alcohol use disorder costs payers, so that's Medicare, Medicaid, and private payers, somewhere between $25 and $35 billion a year in the US. And the average success rate for treatment is pretty low. So this is a very large industry with a well-established distribution and treatment platform that is highly underperforming. So if you were a tech bro sitting in Silicon Valley, what am I going to disrupt next? This is not that we are tech bros, but this is an industry that is ripe for disruption. Very large, very poorly performing incumbents, and we have technology that we have a certain level of confidence will be effective. And when we look at the drug that we're repurposing J&J's Spravato, which is, as I said, forecast to be a $2 billion drug. It's already hit blockbuster status. It's forecast to have a $2 billion run rate in 2026. They had to remake the the depression treatment market in the US had to be completely retooled because the treatment market for depression in the US was you go to your psychiatrist for 15 minutes, you go to your doctor for 15 minutes, and someone prescribes you SSRIs that you take at home on a daily basis, and you come back to your doctor in however many months' time. Spravato is a nasal spray which requires people to be in a clinic under observation for 2 hours after treatment. That treatment cycle didn't exist for depression, so J&J had to build that market. They built that market, and it's now a $2 billion forecast run rate. If you look at addiction, as I said, there's 15,000 clinics already in place in the US, currently treating, majority of which treating people with alcohol use disorder, 80% of which have therapists and drug on site. So we think this really has the potential to change how alcohol addiction is treated in a very large market. And again, the Alkermes example, Vivitrol, they're repurposing an already approved drug into a monthly depot. It's $2,000, $1,500 to $2,000 per month per injection. And that's the price comparator. And in our racemic ketamine program, we outperformed that drug in our phase 2 versus their phase 3. So we think from a commercial perspective and from a market opportunity perspective, 002 is what I'm really, really excited about. And I say sorry to the rest of my children and the rest of the programs for not choosing them. Dave, which one are you most excited about from a science basis?
Well, since I started doing my PhD in 1979, I started working on cocaine then. I would love to have a solution to cocaine and methamphetamine addiction before I finally retire, which won't be for a long time, I can promise you. So I'm very excited by SVN 015. It really could be the two different enantiomers could turn out to be really remarkably exciting new developments. So that's where my real thrill is at present.
And I think for your audience, Kevin and Graham, is we're lucky enough through David's long-standing relationships with the US healthcare system. We have 015, I beg your pardon, is currently on the NIDA Acceleration Drug Development Program. So they are conducting a 2-work package preclinical program for us in their own infrastructure, funded themselves, but we own all the data. So work package 1 that's currently ongoing, they're testing against cardio risk. And work package 2 then is 2 species efficacy for both cocaine addiction and methamphetamine addiction. That, if we were to fund that ourselves, would be somewhere between 3 and 5 million US. But NIDA are conducting that work for us. We own all the data thereafter, so it has no impact on our IP. And then NIDA run a secondary program called the UG3 UH3 grant, which provides up to $3 million a year for 5 years to bring you to the end of phase 1. So hopefully, in a couple of months' time, if we are successful in work package 1 or work package 2 and work package 2 of the initial program, we'll be essentially handing them their data back and asking for approval for this grant. So we think if we are successful in that initial phase, we'd be well set up to compete, to apply for the competitive UG3 UH3 grant, which could potentially bring us to the end of phase 1 without having to fund any of the cost ourselves. And if you think of the size of the problem that we're looking to treat, methamphetamine, which is a massive addiction problem in the US, and cocaine, which is a growing issue in the US, and we could get to the end of phase 1, which is a real inflection for a licensing asset. We're very excited about that, but I am commercially more excited about 002.
Dave, do you feel that this system that you've got in place now at Solvonis is going to produce more and more opportunities over 26, 27, 28? I mean, obviously they're coming out pretty fast at the minute, but what do you see ahead?
Well, as I said, I'm a psychopharmacologist. I've given lots of different kinds of drugs, but there are a few out there I haven't. You know, there are areas of interest like orexins. There are also some very novel short-acting anxiolytics and sleep-promoting agents we could explore. You know, we're looking at any area where there is potential for innovation that could be relevant to the big problems like depression, addiction, anxiety. You know, I think we have expertise to deal with a lot of psychiatric brain disorders and potentially neurological ones. But at present, we haven't actually started discussing the neuro implications, but we could, we're well set to do that as well.
We have a very large library of serotonin, dopamine, and noradrenaline receptor modulators. So currently, we're pointing them, as I said, as David said, PTSD and other trauma-related mental health disorders, methamphetamine and cocaine addiction, and depression. But there are other indications that we could potentially pursue with those assets. We haven't decided as of yet what indications we will pursue, but I think the key message here for your audience is we have a deep pipeline and we're only just at the beginning.
Very good. Mar-a-Lago, what happened? Did you meet Mr. Trump?
No, Trump wasn't there that day. I think he was there the next weekend, and there was some big announcements. I can't even the speed at which the US government is moving at the moment. I'm not particularly sure what announcement was made next weekend, but I think the world's great and good were there. It was a very productive evening. So just for your audience, one of our largest shareholders is a company and an individual called Michael Lehman, and an investment vehicle or fund called Pamlico Shoals, that the LPs or the licensed partners, so the people that fund are high net worth or ultra high net worth Americans, very much in favor of Trump. And so every year that fund has a get-together in Mar-a-Lago, where the portcos or the portfolio companies come and the LPs come together to share their ideas and to wish each other well. So it was a very productive conversation or evening. I have to say there was a Solvonis shareholder at pretty much every table that I went around to. And then I'm showing my age. There was some guy from NSYNC performing afterwards, and it was a bit too loud for me. I scarpered to the back and spoke science and tried not to speak politics to various people.
Yes, politics not a good idea in that situation, I would imagine. How many farmers have you got interested in all of these different aspects? Are you getting good communication with the farmers at this stage, or are we away from that yet?
Sorry, I thought for a moment there at the beginning of that sentence you're told farmers with an F as opposed to a PH. I was wondering what way that question was going. I'm pleased with the progress on 001. It is taking longer than I hoped. I was hoping to have something done within the course of 2025, but I do accept that we are relatively small in the grand scheme of the pharma industry, and we have to move at the speed of other people's companies, and it is an involved process for a company to decide to in-license an asset. And so there are various hoops that need to be gone through. And so we are in discussions with more than one counterparty at this stage. And when we have more information on that, we will happily share it with the market or the street. And that is the only asset that we have in development that we are currently in discussions with anyone around. The inflection point for 002 is the completion of a phase 2B program in the US. The US would probably be a more expensive location to run a phase 2B trial, but there's only two places in the world as far as Americans are concerned. There's the US, and then there's this other place called ROW, or Rest of World, and they only really care about stuff that happens in the US. So to me, that's why we run that program in phase two in the US. And the inflection point for that program happens should we successfully complete that program, and someone can then step into phase 3 thereafter. And for the PTSD program and the other preclinical assets, really the inflection point happens after you've completed a phase 1 program. We've got a very, very clear business model where we are very laser focused on a careful use of our capital, and that's evidenced by the fact that our 1 program phase 3 is potentially the cheapest phase 3 trial in the history of the pharma industry to us because of our partnerships with the state in the UK. Our intent would be to seek grant funding in the US for a phase 2 program, probably from someone like NIAAA, and we have our introductions and connections there. And also we would seek to continue seeking non-dilutive financing to progress the preclinical programs through to the end of phase 1, as we're doing with 015 for stimulant use disorder, but what we will also do for the PTSD program and the depression programs in due course. That's all I should say, to get those to the inflection points where we can have a conversation with pharma whilst also being very, very, very careful in how we spend our capital.
Yeah, I mean, the sheer size, as you've already pointed out, of SVNS 002 is huge. I mean, when you compare it to Johnson & Johnson's Vavato or whatever it is. I'm sorry, I'm not very good at these pronunciations. Spravato is just vast. Even if you had a small percentage of that, it would be phenomenal, and it's not likely to be a small percentage. It's likely to be a bigger percentage. But the initial one is definitely SVNS 001, which is going to be, I presume, UK and Europe. Is that how that will fold out if it happens?
We would be, if we are successful in out-licensing it, we would be out-licensing it for the UK and the EU markets. And the reason for that is, and this is a bit technical, but you can get something called a mixed full application or approval in the UK and the US, or sorry, the UK and the EU, I beg your pardon. And in that, you can secure 8 to 10 years protection on the data that you produce, and then you can cross-reference data available in the literature. So in essence, as part of an approval process, you need to go to the regulator with your manufacturing package, so how you will manufacture, how the drug is manufactured, your preclinical package, which is your preclinical stuff, your tox stuff, etc. And then you've got your phase 1 human study, which is safety, phase 2, which is dose finding and efficacy, and phase 3, which is efficacy at scale. And you bring that whole package together, provide it to the regulator, and the regulator makes a decision as to whether or not you're approved to market your drug for a specific indication in their territory. So what we're doing with the 002 asset is we will be bringing forward part of our own data, so our phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 data in due course, and then a preclinical package that we cross-reference into J&J, because we will have approval from the regulator under their 505(b)(2) program to cross-reference into their preclinical package. For 001, what we would be planning to do if we were to bring it forward ourselves, or what we would be recommending a future partner does, is they take the phase 2 and phase 3 data that we have generated, and then they reference the literature or publicly available information for phase 1 and for the preclinical program, and then they have their CMC, their manufacturing package that they bring together because they'll be manufacturing it themselves. And so in the UK and the EU, you can secure 8 to 10 years regulatory data protection on the data that you produce. So that'll be the phase 2 and the phase 3 data. That's only available in the UK and the EU, and that's why we'd be seeking to out-license it for the UK and the EU. And what that means is any other company would have to go and run their own phase 2 and phase 3 trials in order to be able to apply for authorization to market their brand of ketamine for the treatment of alcohol use disorder in the UK or the EU. And it's highly unlikely that another company would do that because of the cost involved in a phase 2 or phase 3 trial, because they'd have to pay for it themselves, because it would be very unlikely that another government would provide the same level of grant funding that we received to doing it again for the same company. So it's highly unlikely the UK Department would provide another grant to another company to go and run a phase 2 and phase 3 trial when we've already secured those grants. So we believe, so this is a very long answer and I do apologize, but that's why we would target the UK and the EU together. That's the reason for that, is that regulatory data protection is available, and that makes me believe that whomever brings this forward, be it us or a third party, when we out-license it, that gives you 8 to 10 years to build a very substantial franchise in the UK and the EU for the treatment of severe alcohol use disorder.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, so my last question for Professor David Nutt. Do you see in the next, let's say 7 to 10 years, that these drugs will fundamentally change the way that we're able to treat addiction?
Unquestionably, for two reasons. One is they're beginning to do it already, and what we're doing is making them better, and in the case of the entactogens, they're easier to use, and because people now are beginning to understand the huge economic cost of both addiction and other mental health problems. And even our government has accepted it does need to invest more. And it has, in the UK, they've set up a new initiative called the Mental Health. So
Dave, even our government.
Even our government, that's right. The field is moving. All the stars are aligned. All the planets are aligned. Now we've got new innovative treatments that work in a very different way, that work faster and are better, and we've got acceptance of the need for change. So that's the next 7 to 10 years are going to be very thrilling, I think.
Okay, my question before we wrap up the interview is you raised £1.25 million in October, I think. But you've also got a combination of grants and you've got sort of joint ventures with different bodies. How from an investor's point of view, how long should they expect that money to last before you potentially will have to come back to the table to look for more equity funding?
Yeah, so as it currently stands, our runway, we've got runway through to Q1 2027. And between now and then, we think there's some significant that we can deliver and achieve some significant catalysts with that available capital. So we would hope to have an out-licensing completed for 001. We'd hope to have the scientific bridge established between us and J&J's Spravato for 002. And subject to timing, having a file submitted with the FDA requesting approval for a phase 2B trial. For our PTSD program, we'd hope to have a lead identified. And then submitted grant applications for non-dilutive financing to bring that forward to an IND. So that's an application for a phase 1 program. For the 015 program for stimulant use disorder and methamphetamine addiction, again, that's not costing us anything because NIDA are running it, but we would hope to have within that runway have work package 1 completed, so cardio risk, and then also work package 2 completed, which would be the 2 species tox. And subject to the success of that program, have submitted an application for a UG3, UH3 non-dilutive financing through to the end of phase 1. And for our depression program, we would hope to have taken the data, because it's the same asset. So we take the depression data that Dave mentioned and the cardio data and put those two together, and again seek non-dilutive financing to bring that program through to an IND enabling study. So we can achieve a lot with the capital that we have available, and the capital that we have available sees us through to Q1 27.
Okay, good. So investors can buy with confidence, knowing that there's not going to be a placing around the corner at some vast discount.
Yeah, no, we've no plans right now to raise capital. We have capital on hand to enable us to achieve some significant milestones.
Good. Kevin, do you want to ask your favourite question?
Yeah, we don't want to call it the your last meal, but what would be the food that you would like to have at any time in any place?
Right. So this is a serious question, is it?
This is a serious question. What food is in the Professor David Nutt household? Would you be like, I want to eat this?
Ah, I see. My wife makes an absolutely stupendous coriander chicken, and that can see me out.
Very good. Anthony?
I'm quite partial to my Sunday roasts, to be honest. So I do like a slow roasted shoulder of pork, slow roasted forequarter of lamb. And I have actually managed to track down a butcher that does boar. So I have on order a shoulder of boar for next Sunday. So I'll let you know how that goes.
Where do you get boar from?
My local butcher. We chat about meat quite a lot over the counter. So I was trying to find out if he could do me some goat. He can't get goat. I was trying to then get retired dairy cow. You can't get that either. Nor can he do mutton. So I was figuring, if you're going to slow roast shoulder of lamb, well, why not do mutton, because it's got a better flavour. And anyway, we managed to land on the fact that because it's only the regular cuts that most people want, but he does have a line on a man who can get boar. So I've ordered a shoulder of boar.
And that man has a gun.
Undoubtedly.
Yeah, there might be one less boar knocking around Ireland next week.
Okay, so the question that we always ask is, what's the best piece of advice you've ever received, and what's the best piece of advice you think you've given someone else?
The best advice I ever received was in my early on in my career, when I worked in a company called Aon, world's largest insurance and reinsurance brokerage. I was sent off to a client site to do something, and my manager at the time, or my boss at the time, said, "Listen, just one thing, don't fuck it up." that was the best. That was the best advice that I ever received, and I think the best advice I hope that I've ever given anyone was just to work at something where you can be yourself, so where you can be genuine. So work in a business, work in an industry, work in a career where you can be yourself, and you don't have to be someone else at work and compared to someone else to who you really are at home, so that you don't have that internal challenge, and that you can work to your strengths as opposed to work to your weaknesses.
Thank you, Professor.
Yeah, my PhD supervisor was a man called Professor David Graham Smith, who ran the MRC Clinical Pharmacology Unit in Oxford, where I did my PhD. And his advice to me was, David, never change, because he quite liked my enthusiasm and my energy. So I haven't. And my advice to other people is always ask questions. And if you don't get the right answer, find someone who can get the right answer.
Very good.
That's a good one. Yeah. As long as it agrees with you, you'll be okay.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, both of you, thank you so much for coming on Monday Upbeat Markets, and wish you all the best with the year forward. We've still got 10 months of the year, 11 months of the year to go. So go for it.
Thank you.
And we'll see you later.
Thank you very much, Graham. Thank you, Kevin.
Okay, so Kevin, I thought that interview with Solvonis was fantastic. What did you think?
Yeah, I think it was great. I think, they often say you should invest with the management, and the management is more important even than what's involved with the company. I rate Anthony a lot, and now I've spoken to Professor David Nutt. Well, my goodness, he knows what he's talking about, and he's keen to turn the things that he's been talking about, researching, all of those things. He's keen to turn those into real life solutions, and that's exciting to see. It's not just a farmer trying to make money, though the valuation gap is bananas. It's absolutely crazy.
It's a nice niche that they've got, because I think a lot of these biotechs are looking for cures for cancer, for cures for heart disease, leukemia, etc. You don't really hear of sort of treatments for addiction that much,
Yeah, yeah.
especially in this space.
And why I'm pretty confident, and I'm happy to say I'm a big shareholder myself, why I'm actually confident is because I do believe these systems work. I trained as a human givens therapist, which was effectively using the therapy side of things, and never used obviously the ketamine. But if you add the ketamine, then it allows the brain to think more clearly, to use the frontal cortex to actually think. They always say the people who are depressed or drunk or whatever are actually very, very stupid. And it's true, because what happens is the amygdala, which is like the security guard of your brain, takes over. There's no there's no gray area anymore, which is the thinking bit. There is basically black or white. So it's yes or no. It's a run or fight. It's all of those different things. If you ever spoken to anybody who's depressed or down, they'll always give you a definitive, like, one way or the other. Do you know what I mean? It's either the end of the world is nigh, or, I couldn't possibly do that, or, all the reasons can't do it. There's no middle ground thinking at all. So what I see this whole system within Solvonis is doing is allowing the brain to think more clearly, so that we can use our own thoughts and change our behavior. As he said, you have to change your behavior. So yeah,
and the addressable markets. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of millions of people suffer from alcohol use disorder, which is, many times the population of the UK.
No, well, as he said, SVNS 002 is potentially a blockbuster drug. It's coming on the back of Johnson and Johnson's drug, and they have done a lot of the spade work. So yeah, it could be phenomenal. Is right. It really could be tremendous.
Yeah. So what else has been catching your eye in the last few days?
Well, we had Colin on, didn't we, about Kendrick Resources, Colin Bird. So that has gone from strength to strength over the week. I think as we record this, nearly a penny was paid. I think it was 0.99 pence was paid. So from the lows there, it's up 200%. From the very, very lows, which was a long time ago, I think it's up maybe 500%. But the reality is they've got a cracking rare earth project there. It's going to do incredibly well, I think. So it should do well. We had a big raise from African Pioneer, £1.8 million. This is Bazant 2.0, okay? So anybody has any doubt, this is Bazant at 0.02 pence. If you get into African Pioneer 1 to 1.5p, you are going to be getting in at the ground floor. And they've got more copper, gold and silver than Hope and Gorob. Hope and Gorob will in the end have more, I think. But they've got more as it stands, 300,000 tons of contained copper. And if you listen to the roast yesterday, I'm very encouraged also by CMRS, Critical Minerals, because I see them having a fantastic copper project in Morocco. And another one which we interviewed last week was Landor Resources. Just a very simple deal. Gold, 600,000 plus ounces of gold, with the potential to make it much, much bigger. And we can come on to gold and silver. I mean, what's your thoughts on what's been happening in the gold and silver market?
Well, I witnessed, as we all did on Friday, I've never seen anything like it. To see a asset class fall 35% in one day is extraordinary. I don't think I've ever seen that ever happening in my...
Well, if that doesn't sort of set the red sirens off and tell you that there's manipulation in the market, nothing ever will. It's absolutely bananas what's been going on. I mean, we do have the Fantasy Island silver, And if you want to buy that, you got to buy 5,000 ounces, and you can buy it and then ask for delivery. What most people sort of didn't see was that on Friday, there was 1.6 billion ounces of silver traded. Now, that is twice the annual production for the entire world. 65% of that production is now tied up with China, and they're not letting it go. Okay, so you can argue that there's about 300,000 ounces maximum in the rest of the world every year, right? 300 million ounces. They traded 5 times that amount on Friday, and most of it was sells. In fact, 90 whatever percent, right? And they lost everybody out all the way down, and then they bought the contracts themselves, because they're then going to ride it the other way, because they've made such huge losses on their shorts that they've then got to ride it the other way. Now, the scenario is that has not changed the fact that come March contract, which is what all those contracts were sold, there is now billions of ounces that could be delivered. So where are they going to get the silver from? Questions on a postcard, or answers on a postcard, I should say.
Yeah.
Where are they going to get the silver from? It's not there. It's unobtainium. It's like, it's not there. To explain to you, yesterday I bought silver in my broker here in Egypt, $120 an ounce, and I paid it. Why? Because they're playing a fantasy game. They're playing like a strange game. Because the banks were in such a mess, they had to get out of it. Now, whether they have managed to get out of it, I don't know. But all they've effectively done is pushed it down the line 2 months. Because the end of February is going to be difficult. The end of March is going to be impossible. It's literally impossible. They do not have the silver. Now, if China comes in, India comes in and buys this market now for delivery in March, it's a disaster. It's a disaster for these financial institutions that hold it. What we're going to find, I believe, in March, and I'm on my rant now, but what we're going to find out in March is that the COMEX will be empty of silver. The London bullion market will also be empty of silver come the end of March, because effectively they don't have it. They've sold the contracts, they don't have it. So we're going to have 2 markets. We're going to have a physical market where you buy the silver and you hold it, or someone holds it for you in a vault, or you're going to have the fantasy market, which is going to trade silver, but you can't have delivery. So what's the point? There'll be no point in it. It will be a pointless situation.
But then that the integrity of the markets will then be put into question, because any other asset class, if you go and buy a house on paper, you expect to have that house at the end of the contract. The same with anything. If contract law will just be ripped up. I don't know how they can make a disconnection between the fancy market. Oh, sorry, I'm saying it now. Between the sort of paper market, shall we say, and the physical markets. Do you know what I mean? So
but this is a tug of war between who controls the precious metals market, whether it's China or whether it's the US. And their first port of call was silver. China's won. Doesn't matter what happens from this point. The silver, the reality of the physical market has won. Gold's next. Mark my words, gold is going to be next. Because within 3 to 6 months, I believe that gold will also become unobtainium. You won't be able to get it. My definition was these $38 trillion of American debt, okay, plus all of the money that's flushing around that people are now saying you should have 10% or 20% in gold and silver. That's like a swimming pool full of water. And it's trying to jump into the bucket, which is basically physical metals, which as it stands is silver, gold, platinum. And that is the size of a bucket. So you got a swimming pool amount of money trying to jump into a bucket. So this bucket has got to just get bigger and bigger and bigger. how can it get bigger? It can't get bigger by producing gold and silver because it doesn't exist. It can only get bigger by the price going up, because you can't manipulate precious metals. You either dig them up and get them, or you don't have them. So,
out of interest, Kevin, when you were buying your silver in
Yep.
Egypt, what you buying it at? What did you say? $120.
Yep.
What could you have sold it for if you wanted to sell? What was the selling price?
around 117.
117. Okay, that's interesting to know.
And gold
Okay,
is much different. Gold, the difference in the gold price is normally around 1%.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Okay. Well, it's interesting observations, and again, I suppose the mining stocks are going to be put into the spotlight again at some stage.
Well, the mining stocks are on a little bit of a sale this morning. Nothing major, but they're on a little bit of a sale. But it's ridiculous because the mining stocks haven't changed. The mining stocks, in essence, are still going to be getting $120 for the silver, and whatever for the gold, because the COMEX price is a fantasy. You know, at the end of the day, if you want to buy silver anywhere else, anywhere in the world, and that includes in the US, you are paying well over $100 an ounce for it. This is the fact.
Interesting. I was watching Fresnillo, which is a FTSE 100 silver miner in
Yep.
Mexico, and the price of silver dropped 35%, and yet Fresnillo is down only like 4% now. It just shows you, because they're selling physical.
Fresnillo at some point last week was trading around 44, 45 pounds a share, and I was looking at it at 39.60 actually just the week before, and then this morning it was about 35 pounds. I don't know what the price is right now, but I think it's probably gone up a bit again.
Not far off it. It's actually it's £35 and 10p.
Okay, so right now that's a bargain. Okay, because silver is $120 an ounce. Okay, silver is not $80 an ounce. It is $120 an ounce. So if you wanna believe the fantasy market, go right ahead. But try and buy the physical silver at that price, and you will not be able to. They can only hold it here for so long. This is market disruption, market whatever way you want to look at it. So
Very good. Other things to talk about, Kevin. Have you followed our very own Energy Pathways?
Yeah, I've been following it. I also had a chat with Ben Klube over the weekend as well, so he's very positive and looking forward to what's ahead. Yeah, I think
above the placing price, which is good to see.
You were commenting to me as well before we came on about all of these British stocks as well seem to have taken a bit of a bump because of the government actually may even support some British businesses, which would be phenomenal.
No, I think it was a week ago that it was on LinkedIn. Someone sent me a message about the UK National Wealth Fund have got £100 billion to put into domestic projects, critical infrastructure, decarbonisation, etc. Energy Pathways, in terms of decarbonisation, fits right in that very heart of it. And also, addressing these curtailment costs that they are, the government or the taxpayers incurring every year as a result of underutilised energy from the wind power. If you've got something that can actually address that, then you're onto a winner, I would have thought.
Yeah, I would imagine so. I mean, we've got to support our own businesses, surely.
Yeah, and I see the Tungsten West is up 12% to a new high for the year, 22.25p. They were 1.3p about 2 years ago, so they've gone up about 17 times, and they're kind of following on the footsteps of Guardian Metals.
So
I think that there's definitely a trend towards these tungsten stocks, but particularly with domestic ones. And then the other one that caught my eye was Cornish Metals. The ticker is TIN. They were up about 50% since December. So again, all these companies seem to be gaining some traction. Whether this is a coincidence or they're just up because on their own merits, I don't know.
Yeah, you've got SML there as well. They're tungsten as well. The issue with Tungsten West is it's so close to the town, the actual mine, whereas the SML one is not. It's out in the countryside more. But yeah, they've both got good opportunities. Both got good tungsten. Tungsten price in general is going mental. We've seen GMET price go sky high and then come back quite a bit. Again, I think another good buying opportunity there in GMET. There was news. Do you remember we interviewed Andrea from Zenith recently?
Yes.
So there was news that just came out this morning about another solar acquisition that they did in Piedmont. 2 additional sites are also being looked at as well, but this one has given them another 10 megawatts. So they're now up to 130 megawatts. They're paying €768,000 for this one. It's basically they will only pay the money when it's construction ready. But that puts them up to 130 megawatts with 2 more on the go. So the solar on its own covers the valuation for Zenith. Okay, so get that into our brains that the $573 million dollar law situation compensation is not priced into this at all, like zero. And also the uranium projects in Italy, zero valuation. The only valuation that's coming out of Zenith right now is solar. So my view is this is gonna go on quite a run, and it's massively undervalued in terms of Zenith. Even if the legal thing does not come to the effect that we all want, the value is less than the current market capitalization. So yeah, you want to listen to that previous podcast, I think, if you haven't, and have a look at Zenith, because I think it's going to do very well. We are going to have a boom of stocks in the next 12 to 24, 36 months, in my view. I think we're right at the start.
Well, that was what Richard Penny said from Oberon.
We're right at the start of a huge bull run, and people are thinking, "Oh, that's gone up 100%. That's fantastic." But honestly, my view is that is just the absolute tip of the iceberg. We are literally.
Did you hear about this regional bank that got closed over the weekend? Did you hear about this?
No,
Kevin. No, no. Some regional bank was closed by a regulator, I understand. And
this is in America, you mean?
America, sorry. And I think there's there's talk of contagion, and I think there was. I haven't read into it too much to know if this is the beginning of or a spiral, if this is just a flash in the pan. Have you had any thoughts about the way the US economy is going to go and how that might affect the global economy?
Well, the American financial system is in a mess. No matter what way we want to look at it, you cannot borrow and borrow for decades upon decades unless you have the ability to print money whenever you want. Now that's disappearing. If you are no longer the currency of the world, you cannot just print. And that's why we're saying, I think even if the Federal Reserve comes in and cuts interest rates, bond rates aren't going to come down because everybody wants more money for the risk that they're taking holding American bonds. And also there's been issues where, countries have just said, we're not holding these anymore. Over Greenland, Denmark dumped all their bonds. Sweden dumped all their bonds. It's going to happen. So if you no longer have the ability to print your way out of a situation, then there's going to be a lot of pain. Will that pain translate to the rest of the world? I think it will, but not for very long. I think the rest of the world's going to get on with it. The main loss here is going to be the US consumer. I think the US consumer is going to be hit hard.
You don't think some of Trump's initiatives with the move into crypto will make any difference?
You're going to have to revalue something. So if he thinks revaluing crypto is going to work, then it's going to work. If he thinks revaluing gold, which I think is very likely, is going to work and allow them to offset some of that value that they have in gold against their debt, then I think it's going to work. But we could be talking about scary valuations for gold. You could be talking $20,000, $30,000 an ounce. And I've listened to all sorts of podcasts, people talking that this is what could happen. That's really sort of doomsday stuff. Like it's not good. But for miners, for anybody who's got gold in the ground, it's going to be unbelievable, obviously. And all the projects that you thought might not work are certain to work on higher metal prices. But the one thing I think for me is that the world desperately needs, and this has nothing to do with precious metals, the world desperately needs copper for all the different things it wants to try and achieve. So, yeah.
Very good. Anything else worth talking about before we close this?
Not really. Our stocks of the year are doing pretty well, but we'll recap on those probably at the end of February. But as it stands, we're significantly up already, so we should be tapping ourselves on the back for that. So, yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, on that note, thank you very much for watching. Remember, if you do like what you see, please like and subscribe. And remember, mum's the word.
This podcast was brought to you by Monday Upbeat Markets. If you would like to appear on a future episode of the Mums Podcast, please email mondayupbeatmarkets@gmail.com.